got the link to this broadcast. You are most probably a member of Saai. You are most probably a Zimbabwean or an ex-Zimbabwean, or you have family or other interests in compensation for farmers in Zimbabwe. If you have received this link and you are watching it live now, you have most probably also received a link to another discussion this afternoon. It will start in about an hour from now, and that would be a very interesting debate between the powerful influencer Colonel Chris Wyatt and Chris Mutsvangwa, the former ambassador of Zimbabwe to China, former leader of the war veterans, and currently the spokesperson for ZANU-PF. And that discussion will interrogate the fresh breeze in Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe's positioning under the second Trump administration, which, in no matter how you look at it, is really bringing about tectonic shifts in geopolitics. A lot of things are changing because Trump has won the election and because of the regulations he brings into play. I had the privilege of meeting President Mnangagwa a few times over the last few weeks. And in these engagements, this is what we've discussed. We have discussed the new geopolitics and Zimbabwe's positioning here. We have discussed SADC matters and his plans for SADC. But we have also discussed what it will take to bring Zimbabwe back into the mainstream of the global economy. Most important, it will take fundamental changes to the approach to compensation. Let's quickly touch on where we stand with that. Compensation was really first discussed between farmers' representatives and ZANU-PF when President Mugabe was still in office. That was in 2014, when he reached out to SACAU at the time, the Southern African Confederation of Agricultural Unions, saying that he plans to embark on a program of compensation, but there are certain conditions to it. And after a few workshops, which was at the time facilitated by the CFU, we tabled a rural development strategy for him. And in this strategy, which had 6 stages or steps, one of the steps was compensation. At the time, the proposal was compensation both to white farmers who lost their land in the fast-track land reform program since 2000, also compensation to Matabele farmers who lost their land before, during and after Guguriundi in the middle 1980s, and also compensation to beneficiaries of land reform who occupied the land and who tried to eke out a livelihood from the land for the last 25 years, some a little less, and who now would opt out to vacate the land, to open land up for production again. The discussion since 2015, and especially in this strategy document, was not only about compensation, it was also about 3 other things. It was about reviving the rural economy in Zimbabwe, making sure that the wealth is unlocked from the land itself, that the land would actually contribute to the national fiscus, that jobs would be created where Zimbabwe needs it most, in the deep rural areas. Agriculture is a sector that has all the potential to earn dollars, which is not being done at the moment. simply because the wealth is still locked up. The idea was that once compensation happens, that a land and agricultural bank would be populated again, would be capacitated to assist farmers with production loans so that they can farm profitably again. And then certain key value chains would be kick-started again. We discussed cotton and milk and forestry and the horticulture sector, the export industries, value chain assets such as pack houses, the linkages to the markets. But we also discussed in that strategy document farmer development, how to pave the way for beneficiaries of land reform to become profitable farmers. And our proposal was that we measure the success with the assistance of a bank manager. That success can only be ticked off if a farmer is really profitable, because agriculture is a business, and the business which is not profitable is also not sustainable and is a welfare case. Zimbabwe has way too many of those. So this document was given back to us little less than a year later, around middle 2016, and there was a request for further information. A request was to relook at some of the proposals, or even the way we articulated these proposals. Very clearly, President Mugabe was not prepared to take any political risk, and he wanted to ensure that he would be able to save face when he announces this strategy. But before things could progress any further, we saw the change at the helm, and President Mnangagwa took over. And actually, at the time, it felt as if we will have to start at zero again. Fortunately, at the time, the previous Minister of Agriculture, Air Marshal Perrin Shiri, he got very involved in the global agricultural debates, and I met him a few times in Europe, at the Green Week, for example, at the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture in Berlin. And we started to discuss, in the presence of agricultural leaders, business leaders, and political leaders in Europe, we started to discuss the possibility of an agreement on compensation. And Minister Shiri was very clear about it. He said, ZANU-PF has already made the decision, they made a mind shift that compensation is imminent. The question is how much, how, when, and how the international world would be able to assist for Zimbabwe to unfreeze its position in global trade again, how the sanctions would be lifted as a result of compensation. And that was the beginning of the deliberations on the global compensation deed. I cannot speak firsthand of those negotiations. I was not party to it. But because I have so many friends in the organized agricultural sector in Zimbabwe, I was kept well informed on the progress. And I think, looking back at what happened in the run-up to the signing of the global compensation deed, one often disregards the impact of that agreement. Most important is that there was an agreement on quantum. The numbers were put on the table. And there were two numbers which were agreed upon. Those were the values of improvements and the values of land. This led to the global compensation deed, which was signed by four parties: the government of Zimbabwe, the CFU, SACFA as a representative body for farmers in Matabele land, and of course Welcon. Personally, I was very critical on Welcon signing that agreement because it is not a constituency. They do not represent anybody. They do not have a mandate. It's a business. But they were probably involved because they had the data. They had a list of farms and they had values to those farms. And it was in their hands. So no one else had the privilege to it. Not government, not organized agriculture. It has changed since. That databases is no longer only under the sole ownership or control of Welcon, because it's also now in the hands of the government of Zimbabwe. Now, after that signing of the global compensation deed, in which it was also agreed that compensation by the government of Zimbabwe would only be for the improvements on land, for two reasons. One, because of this ideological narrative that the land had been stolen and they would not pay for stolen land. Secondly, because in terms of the Lancaster House Agreement of 1979, the British government was supposed to pick up a part of the bill for land reform, and as far as ZANU-PF was concerned, it is the land part, because that is the colonizing power who, in their narrative, stole the land. So they have to pay for the land. There is this clause in the global compensation deed that stipulates that government would not stand in the way of the farmers seeking compensation for the land from the British government. Now, in end of 2014, beginning of 2015, I did have meetings in Brussels with the British government, or representatives of the British government, actually with the Brussels office. Remember, at the time, the UK was still part of the European Union. So the German diplomatic service assisted me in making contact with the British government in Brussels to ask what the chances would be for the UK government to come back to the table in terms of their obligation under the Lancaster House Agreement to pay for the land. Now, this was shortly before an election in the UK, and there were some political points to be scored if the Zimbabwean issue could be ironed out. So the answer was not a firm no, but it was also not yes. It's a good time to see what can be done about it. But they wanted more, a better insurance that the government of Zimbabwe would perform in terms of their obligations. And they wanted to see what the content of the agreement was. Of course, that agreement was only reached some 5 years later. Then, after the signing of the global compensation deed, in terms of which not all of the improvements, or not the total amount, would be compensated. It was a percentage of that amount, and it boiled down to $3.5 billion US as a global amount. That might be between 65 and 70% of the value of the improvements as it was when it was valued between 2000 and 2008. Now, the government of Zimbabwe did not perform at all. They did not meet any of the obligations in terms of the global compensation deed in the first year, and then they extended it unilaterally to a second year, and they also did not meet any obligations in the second year. For a few months we heard nothing of it, and then they came with a new offer. It was an offer in bonds. This is also when Saai, my home organization, also got involved, and we immediately ran a poll. In this poll, the largest number of dispossessed farmers took part in, and the answer was a very firm no to the bonds proposal. No, because farmers said if a government can cancel title deeds, just imagine what they can do with bonds. And we will not accept bonds which will mature only in 10 years from now, and in exchange give our title deeds, which is a very real thing, just to find out that the government of Zimbabwe does not perform again, and then we don't have our title deeds anymore. This is a very, very valid argument. This is the reason why in Saai we say, hang on to your title deeds. Only this week, 2 more families visited us here in Pretoria, asking if we could assist them to get just and equitable compensation because they've been paid peanuts for their farms. And when we ask them, where's the title deed? They say we no longer have it. And if you don't have your title deed, there's really nothing we can do for you. No matter how much we feel sorry for you and no matter how committed we are to assist farmers, if you don't have a title deed, you have nothing for which you can be compensated now. And this is a battle probably for another time, another place, but for now, it will be impossible to assist. That's also why people who now sign on to this compensation and bonds and who got something like 1% of the value in their pockets, know that there will come a time when you need to bring your title deed to the table, and then you need to have more than the 1% in your pocket. Even 4 or 5% will not do it for you. You must make sure that you have something to sell in compensation. And that something is a title deed. Don't give away your title deed for nothing. Because even if it takes another 50 years, compensation is imminent. All over the world it works like this. There are 67 countries in the world who is busy with land reform. And 18 of them are running a restitution program with compensation if it's not with land. Now, in South Africa, it dates back to 1913. People are now compensated for land they lost under apartheid in 1913. That is 112 years ago. Compensation will happen sometime or another. But to those who have not been compensated yet, and don't be compensated for anything less than what is fair and equitable. When we entered the Friar Saai, we took 3 very controversial positions. The first was about the global compensation deed because we are not a signatory to it. And we said this compensation deed is really not enforceable anymore because the conditions have not been met. Secondly, we said no to the bonds offer. And thirdly, we said compensation alone is not enough. In a scenario where farmers have been compensated, where they received, say, 30-35% of the total value of their land, we will not have a normalized Zimbabwe. a normalized Zimbabwe will be one where there's equal citizenship, where there's no racially discriminatory laws, where there's no hindrance for any farmer from whichever race or color or creed or religion to own farmland, where also white farmers and also Matabele farmers are free to own their property and to utilize it and to farm it. You cannot have a situation forever where your only chance to freely utilize farmland as an owner is in a joint venture with the beneficiary of land reform. This is not acceptable in the modern world. You cannot have that kind of legislation in 2025. And if we can get rid of those limitations on certain categories of farmers, then there would be those who say, but I do own the land, I have the title deed for it. There should be no reason why full title and full ownership could not be restored. If it is practically not possible because there are beneficiaries on the land that's been there for 25 years, might have been born there even and now be farmers themselves on that land, then alternative land of equal value should be made available, like we have in South Africa with the restitution program. And apart from that, you need just and equitable compensation, not just any compensation. Because you see, if you are free to have the land and the compensation is not just and equitable, you would be able to take it to the open market and get market-related compensation in any way by just selling it. It is only then when we would be in the scenario where Zimbabwe's land is liberated again, where any Zimbabwean citizen are free to own and use farmland. At the moment, it is a dead asset. At the moment, the land brings nothing in for the fiscus. In theory, it is rented out, but no one collects the rents. In theory, there is a land market, but no one buys. How do you buy if you are nearly certain that you will lose the land again? How do you buy if there are second title deeds that is being granted? Like an American investor said to me about 2 hours ago, it is very hard to crunch the numbers of an investment in Zimbabwe if there are second title deeds doing the round, because you don't know if there could be a third or a fourth or a fifth title deed. There can be only one title. And the security of property rights is paramount. No one invests in an environment where there's uncertainty about property rights. Then Trump came. He took a few very wild swipes at South Africa. He has not taken any swipes against Zimbabwe yet. And I think it was a very smart move from the government of Zimbabwe to reach out first. First by saying, we will drop all tariffs. No need to pay tariffs if you export your stuff to Zimbabwe. The fact is that not that many people do business with Zimbabwe because the sanctions are still in place or the trade restrictions are still in place and will probably remain in place until the conditions as stipulated in the ZANU-PF Act have been met. Troops out of the DRC and of course compensation to the farmers. But secondly, the normalization of Zimbabwe means that the world must trust the rules and the application of the rules. The world must be convinced that there is integrity in the courts, in the justice system. And the mere fact that the SADC tribunal was disbanded because of a judgment against the government of Zimbabwe does really not help to promote the image of Zimbabwe as an attractive investment destination. This is also the reason why in Saai we took up the matter of the SADC tribunal, and we will take it to the court in Gaborone to put the pressure on SADC to reopen that tribunal. Actually, the tribunal is still open. It was never closed. SADC never had a mandate to close it. They did not get enough votes to meet the 2/3 criteria to close the tribunal. And the Constitutional Court in South Africa already ruled that the only problem with the tribunal is that it has no judges. Judges need to be reappointed to that tribunal, and we are pushing for that. I have been invited to visit the USA, to visit Washington in 2 weeks from now, and quite a number of the meetings scheduled for Washington is on the Zimbabwean issue. So what I will share there is our aspiration as farmers, with the point of departure that we need a normalized Zimbabwe. We need to liberate the wealth of the land, and for that we need some changes in the policy environment. This is what we are pushing for. And the mere fact that ZANU-PF has really made some progressive statements over the last few weeks doesn't say that there is a new spring in the air, but it says that the possibilities are there. If ever there was a time which is ripe for real transformation, it is now. And even if I would be proven to be wrong, and even if it would take another 50 years, the fact is that in the last 25 years, we were never closer to it. Also in terms of the language spoken by inter alia, the spokesperson of ZANU-PF, Ambassador Chris Mutsvangwa, whom you will have the opportunity to listen to in Chris Wyatt's interview with him at 4 o'clock today. So I've shared a few thoughts for the last half an hour until we can go online in Chris Wyatt's portal, which will be in 20 minutes from now. You are welcome to pose any questions. I believe that this is a new function of YouTube. It's the first time that I'm using it. It's the first time actually I've heard of it was today, that there's an interactive button now, and that here on YouTube you can interact with questions, and not only questions. I do not claim to have all the knowledge and expertise or wisdom about Zimbabwe. I'm not even a Zimbabwean. At best, I have a heart for our neighboring country, and I have family and very dear friends there, and hence my involvement in that. So if you have more knowledge or wisdom to share, please do so. Some of the questions are being sent to me now, printed out. Thank you to my staff who is assisting with this. There's nothing on here yet. I also want to invite you, if there's material which you think we should have, if there's something you think we should study, if there is any information which you think we would need to guide us through this process, please send it on. My email address is theo@saai.org. theo@saai.org. I will really appreciate that. There's no questions as yet, no input from your side. And if there's nothing, then we can close this session and we can then follow the link to Chris Wyatt's interview with Chris Mutsvangwa. It will open up at 10 to 4 and the interview will start at 4 o'clock. Thank you.